Okay, welcome to Part C, History of Money. Bubble Mania. Bubble Mania. The last two parts of Lecture 14, we've taken a look at the financial revolution, the chartering of the Bank of England in 1694, the bond markets, the national debt, paper securities, all these quite complicated financial assets. And believe me, as you know, the financial system is not going to get any less complicated from here on out. The stock exchange, and this has a lot of support. There's no doubt. There's a lot of benefits here. A lot of benefits, but it has a lot of opponents. And so for this part of the video, we're going to take a look at three historic bubbles that appear to corroborate the skeptics of the financial revolution, and corroborating this view among many skeptics that a lot of this so-called wealth is fake. It's fake. It's based on speculation. It's based on gambling. It's based on paper assets that are barely not even worth the paper they're written on, and is only benefiting a narrow few who know how to get away with it and who know how to time things just right to get out of the market as soon as the bubble collapses. And all the corruption in government. Let's take a look at three examples. This bubble economy. This is a picture of a bubble going on, and people are buying into the hysteria, as we'll see in the middle of a bubble, in the boom bust cycle, as it's sometimes referred to. At the peak of the bubble, sort of this strange psychology sets in where just everyone wants to buy in, because the price keeps going up. First one, Tulip Mania. Tulip Mania, yes, believe it or not, one of the most famous bubbles in financial history happened in the Netherlands, and it was speculation in tulip bulbs, of all things. Tulips were first introduced to Europe in the mid-16th century. They came from the Ottoman Empire, and they quickly became very popular. They have this intense color about them. You look at them, they're beautiful flowers and the petals, and wow, and before too long you had this profusion of all these different varieties of tulips, and you could breed them in certain manners and create all sorts of different colors, and it's a spectacular thing. I have to admit, beautiful flower. Well, in 1634, all of a sudden, the prices of tulips in the Netherlands started going up quite significantly. This is a painting of Tulip Mania. You see some people selling tulips. But at the peak of Tulip Mania, when the price just kept going up, most of the time when people were buying and selling tulips, they weren't actually physically exchanging tulips. Rather, they were speculating, or they were dealing in paper instruments, contracts, representing tulips. But there were no physical deliveries of the actual tulips being made. Specifically, it was a type of derivative called a futures contract. And a futures contract is this legal contract or agreement by which the buyer of that futures contract agrees to buy something, in this case tulips, at a set price in the future. Okay? So a futures contract, you agree, this agreement, this obligation to buy something at a set price in the future. Now, the reason why you might do this, if you believe that the price of this commodity is going to continue going up, you can lock in a certain price and obtain that commodity at that price in the future. And the expectation is that will be profitable for you, because the actual price of that commodity at that future date will be even higher than what you had agreed to pay for it. if this sounds complicated, it is. And it's another reason why there are many skeptics of instruments such as these. But anyway, the prices of tulips, again, not exchanging hands, just of tulip contracts, were going up and reach such spectacular heights that at the peak of tulip mania, a single tulip bulb sold for more than 10 times the annual income of a skilled crafts worker. Let me repeat that. At the peak of the mania, a single tulip bulb cost or sold for more than 10 times the annual income of a skilled crafts worker. Okay, that's hysteria. That's mania. That's the irrationality of the bubble mentality. Gotta buy in. Here's a tulip farm. A tulip farm in the middle of at the peak of the bubble. Well, look, this is such a great graph. This is from 36 to 37. Look at that. Just massive increase in price. And then within just a few days, and then just the bottom fell out. The bottom fell out, ruined lots of people. You also had many people make a lot of money. Imagine if you bought right here. If you bought, or excuse me, let me run. Imagine if you sold right there. If you sold right there. If you bought like right here, you bought your tulip contracts, and then you sold right here. You made a lot of money. That's a lot of money. The problem is, most people didn't sell when they needed to. And this is, again, the mentality, the psychology of the bubble, and then the burst. Because as this is going up, and people are watching, oh my gosh, this is, and they'll see someone who bought right here and sold right here. And whoa, they made a lot of money. They made a lot of money. And so you're watching it, and you haven't bought in yet, and it just keeps going up, and you're like, okay, I'll buy. And you buy right here. Okay? You buy right here. And it's still going up, and you're wondering, oh, if I sell now, I'll make a little bit of a profit. But, why sell now? It's going to continue going up. And then it starts to crash. And then when it hits here, you freak out. Because you're like, wait, it's lower than what I paid for it. And everything looks like it's going down. And the psychology, all of a sudden, everybody just sell. And it crashes. Woo! The boom bust cycle. Mass psychology. Something else. Let's look at another example. In England, the South Sea bubble. The South Sea Company was a joint stock company. And they were founded in 1711. And without getting into all the complications, basically the function in order to consolidate the national debt in England. Okay, consolidate the national debt in England on favorable terms for Parliament, but also on favorable terms for the company. And in exchange, the company was granted a monopoly over all British trade in South America. And so there were all this hyping up of the company, and this company is going to be this big success. And sure enough, the company's stock rose very greatly. And especially in around 1719 and 1720, as the company expanded its operations, the company's stock rose very greatly in value, and you can see here, went up almost 10 times in a matter of a few weeks. And then the bottom fell out. I believe it was around May of 1720. My memory serves me correctly. I don't have it written down. It just total collapse. It was a house of cards. It was founded on nothing. And the company never ended up. The company, was hyping itself up. Oh, we're going to make all this profit from our trade in South America. Never ended up doing it. It was all scam, and actually a lot of members of parliament were involved. There were members of parliament who had been bribed, were given huge bribes to give different privileges and immunities to the directors of the South Sea Company. Many of the directors of the South Sea Company were involved in insider trading. They had advanced knowledge of different operations in the government debt. The company was using its own shares, was dealing in its own shares, and then people who wanted to purchase shares were given loans backed by those very shares to then spend on purchasing more shares. All just a huge mess. And the bottom fell out. The bottom fell out. But again, imagine the psychology. And you're in England and you're watching your neighbors, and your neighbors bought maybe bought right here, and now the price is here, and your neighbor's going around like, oh, I've doubled the value of my shares has doubled, and now it's at 600, and I'm like, oh shoot, I should have bought at 300, and it goes up to 800, and like, well, I better get in now before it keeps going up, and then I really miss out. And then so you buy at 800, and it goes up to 900, almost 1,000, and oh, I made the right decision. I bought at 800 instead of 950, and then lose everything. By the time it hits here, you panic sell. You lost everything. There are people who lost everything. Imagine if you bought shares in the South Sea Company right here. And now the wise ones, the shrewd ones, the insider traders, they bought down here and sold like right here, right? And made 6 times more than what they paid for the shares. So there are people who made a lot of money. Usually, though, it's the suckers who buy high. My grandfather has dealt with some in stock trading, and he's given me advice. Well, everybody gets this advice, right? Buy low, sell high. Buy low, sell high. Problem is, you don't know what low is exactly, and you don't know what high is. You have to be prudent. But the shrewd, the wise, the prudent, well, they'll buy low, and then they'll see it rise to 400 or 500, and be like, okay, I'll take it. Whereas the suckers, they buy at 800, they buy at 900, they get in late, and then they cling onto their shares and then panic sell. Pretty bad stuff. People absolutely ruined. Let's take a look at the last bubble, John Law's bubble, John Law's scheme. Here's King Louis XIV. Toward the end of his life, King Louis XIV ruled a very, very long time. Died in 1715. Very effective monarch, but by the time he died, his government, the French state, was deeply, deeply in debt. Financial problems up the wazoo. And but he didn't have to deal with it. His successor did. His successor, Louis XV, was actually a child when he became king, and so there he is there. They dressed young boys a little differently back then. The Louis XV was, and this is Louis XIV, by the way, as an old man, was his grandson. Louis XV had a minister rule in his place, and so this minister, and by minister I mean like an advisor, there he is, the Duke of Orleans, there's young Louis XV, got in his head to reorganize France's finances. And though Louis XIV, banks were anathema to Louis XIV, this advisor decides to go along with a financier from Scotland, of all places. From Scotland. He was a Scottish economist and was actually a gambler, appropriately enough. He was a gambler, but he was also a famous economist in Scotland. Wrote on subjects of money and credit, and so he seemed like a pretty good person to turn to. And John Law had an idea, this really elaborate scheme. I'm not going to go into all of it, but this elaborate scheme to reorganize France's finances and reorganize France's debt. And in exchange for helping France reorganize its debt, John Law arranged for himself to be the head of this new bank. It was called the Royal Bank, the Banque Royale. He would be the head of this bank, and this bank would issue paper notes. And those paper notes would be backed by assets or profits taken from another company that John Law founded, eventually merged with the Royal Bank, called the Mississippi Company. And so sometimes this bubble is called the Mississippi Bubble. The Mississippi Bubble. But this bank would issue these paper notes, would consolidate France's debt, would buy up all of France's debt, issue these paper notes, and then the paper notes would be secured by potential profits in Louisiana, in the Mississippi Valley region. John Law was a masterful marketer, and he hyped up the company. Oh, there's going to be big profits. And people bought into the scheme and started buying up the stock and buying up the stock. And before too long, by 1719, 1720, the shares of the company were going through the roof, somewhat like the South Sea Company. Look at this. Look at the value of the shares. Going up in francs. Up, and then actually not as dramatic of a collapse as the South Sea Company, but a halving, more than halved the value of those shares. Anyway, once everything collapsed and the scheme was exposed as a fraud that it was, John Law was he was fired from his position and he fled France, just fear of his life. And France, as a result, never had a financial revolution. France was Catholic. France had an absolute monarchy. So those two things are going against it. And then the one experiment they had ended in total failure. Fraudulent gambler tricked the country, basically. And so there was no banking in France for the next 80 years until Napoleon. No financial revolution in France. Later in the 18th century, there was a new round of wars between England and France, and France was unable to finance those wars like England. England enjoyed a major advantage, significant advantage. Britain had a far more sophisticated financial system than France, because even though Britain had suffered the South Sea Bubble, Britain didn't abandon finance at that point. The South Sea Company was a disaster. It ruined thousands of people. But Britain stays true to the financial revolution. The Bank of England is still there. The national debt is still there. And Britain was able to win these wars and spanked France. I mean, France was humiliated by Britain in the middle of the 18th century. And a big part of the reason why was because Britain enjoyed this far more sophisticated financial system that was able to lead Britain to finance this war on behalf of Britain. It was also very expensive. Look at the British national debt. By the end of 1763, when these wars concluded, the British national debt was 146 million pounds sterling. And so then the British Parliament ordered the American colonies to pay new taxes. And, well, we know how that went. So there was a price for that, too. The gain was that you defeated France. Humiliated France. The loss was, you've got a lot of national debt. You've got a lot of debt, just saddled with debt. By the way, this was the national debt by the eve of World War I. This is not adjusted for inflation, or excuse me, this does not involve inflation at all, because the pound sterling was defined in the same way in 1914 as it was in 1794. So look at that, the growth in the national debt, and then World War I was just off the charts expensive. Anyway, that's that. So thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next time for Lecture 15.